The human tail did not gradually shorten over millions of years. Instead, it disappeared abruptly from our ancestors' body structure. Our ancient ancestors actually had tails. And for many animals, a tail is an incredibly useful body part. It helps them balance, climb, turn, quickly communicate, and sometimes even grip branches. So why would evolution get rid of something so useful? What changed in the bodies of our primate ancestors? And if the tail vanished, why do humans still have a tailbone today? Even more strangely, an early human embryo briefly develops a tail-like structure. That means the story of our lost tail is still written inside our bodies. But the answer has almost nothing to do with humans learning to walk on two legs. Our tail disappeared much earlier, deep in the evolutionary history of the apes. To understand why, we first need to understand what a tail actually does. A tail is not just decoration hanging from the end of an animal. In many species, it acts like a carefully controlled extension of the spine. Cats swing their tails to help stabilize their bodies during sudden turns. Monkeys use theirs to balance while moving through narrow branches high above the ground. Some New World monkeys can even wrap their tails around branches like an extra limb. Kangaroos use powerful tails to support and stabilize their bodies during movement. Dogs also use tail position as an important part of social communication. A tail can be extremely useful. Yet usefulness alone does not guarantee that evolution will keep a body part forever. Evolution does not design animals according to a perfect permanent plan. Instead, populations change as different traits become more or less useful over generations. If an old structure becomes less important, natural selection may stop preserving it strongly. Sometimes that structure becomes smaller. Sometimes it changes jobs. And sometimes it disappears almost completely. Our own evolutionary history appears to include exactly such a transformation. But humans were not the first members of our family to lose their tails. Look at the living apes around us. Chimpanzees have no external tails. Gorillas have no external tails. Orangutans have no external tails. Gibbons also lack external tails. Humans are therefore part of a larger, tailless branch of the primate family tree. That is an important clue. It tells us that the tail vanished before the human lineage existed. The change happened in an ancestor shared by humans and other living apes. Scientists place this major transition roughly 25 million years ago. At that time, early apes were separating evolutionarily from monkeys that retained tails. Their bodies were also beginning to change in other important ways. Many early apes developed broader chests and more flexible shoulder joints. Their limbs became suited to new styles of climbing and moving through trees. Some spent more time moving with the body held upright. Others relied increasingly on their arms while climbing or hanging below branches. Those changes may have reduced the importance of a long, balancing tail. A different body plan was emerging. This does not mean one day an ape suddenly woke up without a tail. Evolution works through inherited differences spreading across many generations. But the genetic change behind tail loss may have been relatively concentrated rather than purely gradual. Recent research has offered an especially interesting clue about how this could have happened. Scientists studying ape genomes focused on a gene called TBXT. This gene helps guide development of the spine and the rear portion of the body. Versions of TBXT also influence tail development in many other animals. Researchers found a genetic change near this gene that is shared by apes. The change involves a piece of mobile DNA known as an Alu element. Humans carry enormous numbers of these small, repetitive sequences throughout the genome. Most are not responsible for dramatic visible changes, but occasionally one lands in a location where it can alter how a gene is processed. In the ape lineage, two Alu elements ended up positioned near the TBXT gene. Their interaction appears capable of changing the RNA produced from that gene. That altered genetic instruction can affect development of the tail region. Researchers tested related changes in laboratory mice,
corresponding with the mouse's behavior.
Some mice developed shorter tails. Others lost much of their tails. The results did not create a perfect copy of ape evolution, but they showed that a relatively small genetic change could strongly affect tail development. This helps explain why tail loss may have occurred faster than people once imagined. One mutation can sometimes have surprisingly large effects on body structure. Still, the story is not as simple as saying one gene removed the tail. Evolutionary changes usually occur inside a larger network of genes, anatomy, and natural selection. The TBXT discovery is best understood as an important mechanism, not the entire story. Once a tailless body appeared, it still had to survive and reproduce successfully. That raises another question. Why was having no tail not a serious disadvantage? The answer probably lies in the changing movement patterns of early apes. A long tail is extremely useful for an animal racing along narrow horizontal branches, but it becomes less essential when movement relies more heavily on arms and flexible shoulders. Early apes may also have used larger branches that supported their heavier bodies. Their center of mass and posture were changing. Their climbing style was changing too. Under those conditions, losing a tail may have carried a smaller cost than before. It may even have brought some advantages. A reduced tail could remove weight from the rear of the body. It could also allow changes in the pelvis and lower spine to develop differently. Scientists are still debating exactly which advantages mattered most. We should therefore avoid claiming that one specific behavior caused the tail to disappear. What we can say is that ape anatomy was changing as a connected system. The tail was only one part of that transformation. Much later, one branch of these tailless apes eventually produced the earliest hominins. Those ancestors began experimenting with increasingly upright forms of locomotion. Eventually, habitual walking on two legs became one of the defining features of our lineage. But by then, the external tail had already been gone for millions of years. This timing matters. Humans did not lose their tails because they started walking upright. Instead, upright walking evolved in animals whose ancestors were already tailless. Our bodies therefore inherited an old ape design and modified it for bipedal movement. Yet something from the tail did remain. Feel the very bottom of your spine. There is a small curved structure called the coccyx. Most people know it simply as the tailbone. The coccyx is made from several small vertebrae fused together. These bones are homologous to part of the tail structure found in our distant ancestors. So, in one sense, a tiny remnant of the tail is still inside you. But calling the coccyx useless would be wrong. It still provides attachment points for several muscles, tendons, and ligaments. Some of these tissues help support the pelvic floor. Others contribute to stability when we sit. Evolution often reuses old structures, rather than erasing every trace of them. The tailbone is a perfect example. Its original role changed, but the structure remained useful in a new form. There is another place where our evolutionary history briefly becomes visible. It happens before birth. During early development, A human embryo forms a small tail-like projection at this stage. The developing spine extends beyond the future position of the pelvis. The embryo can therefore look surprisingly similar to embryos of other tailed vertebrates. Then development changes direction. Most of this projecting tissue is gradually reduced and incorporated into the growing body. The remaining vertebrae contribute to the coccyx. So every human begins development with structures connected to an ancient tailed body plan. This does not mean a human embryo grows a fully functional monkey tail. It means embryonic development preserves parts of an older anatomical blueprint. Evolution modifies development rather than rebuilding an organism completely from nothing. That is why embryos can reveal fascinating clues about ancestry. Rarely babies are born with a projection near the lower end of the spine. These cases are sometimes described dramatically as babies born with human tails. But that phrase can be misleading. Some projections contain only skin fat, connective tissue, blood vessels, or muscle. Others can be associated with developmental abnormalities involving the spine. Doctors therefore examine such cases carefully instead of treating them as simple evolutionary throwbacks. A true ancestral style tail with a normal series of tail vertebrae is extraordinarily unusual in humans. The rare cases are interesting because they show how complex development can be. They do not mean ancient genes suddenly switched a complete tail back on. Our evolutionary past is still there, but it is heavily modified now. Imagine that our ancestors had never lost their tails. Daily life might look surprisingly different. Chairs could need openings behind the seat. Pants might need specially shaped sections for a moving tail. Car seats would have to support another, flexible part of the body. Sleeping positions might also become more complicated, and body language could gain an entirely new dimension. A nervous person might unconsciously lower their tail. Someone excited might raise or move it. Fashion would probably discover dozens of ways to decorate it. But keeping a functional tail would require more than simply adding one to the modern human body. We would need muscles capable of moving it. We would need nerves to control those muscles. The pelvis and lower spine would likely be shaped differently. The brain would also need dedicated circuitry for sensing and controlling its movement. In other words, a tail would change the architecture of the entire body. That helps reveal an important lesson about evolution. Body parts do not exist independently. When one feature changes, many other structures can change with it. The loss of the tail was, therefore, not just the disappearance of one appendage. It was part of a much larger transformation in the bodies of our ape ancestors. Their posture changed. Their movement changed. Their skeleton changed. And much later, one tailless branch eventually became us. Today, the missing tail still leaves clues in our genes, embryos, and tailbone. These clues connect our modern bodies to ancestors that lived tens of millions of years ago. So the next time you sit on your tailbone, remember what it represents. You may have lost the tail, but your body never completely erased its history.